Welcome back to the Business Immigration Benchmark. Sydney Bridger, pleasure to have you back on. Our community manager at WR Immigration. She manages the Immigration Benchmarking Collective and just recently launched a new benchmarking survey. Sydney, tell us all about it.
Thank you so much for having me, Laura. Cannot believe it's 2025. Where does time go? But yes, we just launched our 2025 Q1 benchmarking survey on communication and change management. I'm really excited for this survey specifically because it is a topic that global mobility teams have requested time and time again, especially with the Trump administration coming into effect or in effect already, I should say. Really just adapting to what are the best communication styles, what are other programs doing out there that has been successful, how many times should we communicate, how do we mitigate foreign national anxiety, and then shifting to the change management side of it. It really dives into, okay, so what policies do we need to start thinking about? Do we need to start shifting our mindset to a different, way of tackling our work? Should we leverage technology more? What about AI? So really just getting into the nitty gritty of what's on top of mind for teams. I'm super excited about it. It's going to be available to complete through end of February. So plenty of time to take it. And as a reminder, once you complete the survey, you do get a detailed benchmarking report as well.
Amazing. So I know that there's already been some responses already, even this early in the fielding of the survey. So let's dive into what we're seeing and what we expect and our thoughts on some of these topics like change management and operating a effective communication program.
Yeah, so we've seen about 10 responses already, which is great since we just launched yesterday. But some of the priorities that teams are currently focusing on is one, leveraging technology. What does that look like while working with your legal counsel? Are there ways to amplify it? Another big priority too is compliance. Like we've mentioned previously, it's just compliance is key, just to making sure teams are staying ahead, auditing as much as they need to be, and really just focusing on policy. Those are the top three I've seen so far, especially in terms of the Trump administration and what policies need to be updated. Or if they have great policies, how do you amplify those and take them to the next level? Teams have been planning for this, I think, for months now, right? So even prior to the election, what's to come, the uncertainty level, I feel, is real, and just the anxiety among teams about what processes to update. But from someone who's worked in house, we understand completely that communication and change management is essential. And the return of the Trump administration just amplifies this, right? So teams have already started making processes changes, and I feel that teams will continue to make process changes, right? As we see either new executive orders, travel bans, et cetera, come into play. So it's going to be ever evolving, and teams are adapting as best they can, but finding the right resources is tough at times with so much noise in the industry.
Yeah, I think it can be overwhelming when you see the headlines. And as an in house professional, many of my clients are just overwhelmed because they have a lot of questions coming from foreign nationals. So, my advice is to take next steps bite size. So, if that is talking through a process of how the communications go out, and that's kind of what this survey is a little bit about. What are in house teams using? What methods are they using to communicate to foreign nationals? Is it town halls? Is it emails? Is it newsletters? Is it a intranet site? Because whatever that process is, developing that so you can point your foreign nationals to the truth within your company of how you're handling the process. For example, travel these days, companies are taking different risk tolerant approaches. For a risk conservative company, they're not promoting international business travel for their foreign nationals right now because of the uncertainties of travel bans and the availability of securing visa appointments for foreign nationals that need visa stamps. So, whatever the company's stance is on international travel, for example, we want to be able to point the foreign national to the process and have that documented so that everyone's aware of the information sharing requirements, the details needed, and the information to help the foreign national employee navigate through this uncertain time. So that's all to say bite size, like whatever the first issue is, that may be a travel ban coming in the next few months here. The next step for an in-house professional is to make sure everybody's country of birth, everybody's visa status, all of their sponsored foreign nationals data is up to date. So taking that first step, if we haven't already, and documenting those things in our reporting systems to ensure that when changes come, reports can be immediately pulled. And then, the in-house professional can know, hey, I can't control what changes are coming, but I have the data or I have the process to point to and alert foreign nationals on next steps. Global mobility teams are facing some tough challenges ahead in 2025. Cindy, can you tell us a little bit about how benchmarking comes into play and how teams can leverage this survey or previous surveys or future surveys in support of their program management?
Definitely. So, as members of our immigration benchmarking collective group, you get access to all of our previous survey data, which is great for teams. So, if you're curious about a certain topic, feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to help. But benchmarking in general is really essential. And I absolutely wish I had this when I was working in house because you're able to really see what other teams are doing. And these are teams within your industry, similar program sizes. So, for this benchmarking survey specifically, we're focusing on communication and change management. So, what forms of communication are teams using? What are teams prioritizing now versus later? Are we thinking about updating policies from a change management perspective? Do we support spousal EADs, et cetera? So, there's really a lot that goes into communication and change management. And I think teams, although they've been planning for months, right, even prior to the inauguration, we're going to have to continue to adapt and implement new policies depending on whatever happens because the anxiety is real. I'm sure you've seen that with your clients, Laura.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think especially in 2025, where we're seeing the change in administration, this survey will take a pulse on best practices for communication. So, for example, how are clients reaching their foreign national population to advise them of travel considerations, compliance challenges that are going to be very real in 2025? And, learning what other companies, other in house professionals are doing to be effective, I think is really helpful. So, even if you've got a really great process in place, it's always good to know what other practices are being deployed in the industry so you can make sure that you're approaching things with a set of fresh eyes creatively, which I think we're going to need a lot of creative solutions for immigration and global mobility this year, especially.
Most definitely. And we are hosting virtual roundtables, which is really just a place for global mobility professionals to come together to express ideas. It's been great to see teams, whether they change a policy and want to share it with others, or they have a question specifically about, say, someone got stuck abroad, how would a team handle that situation? Even communication examples. So, one team implemented a town hall, and that was on a monthly cadence versus another team was just starting their communication strategy and trying to figure out from scratch, okay, who do we need to communicate to? Who are the stakeholders here? So it's really a chance for folks to come together and express ideas, which is fantastic.
Are you starting to see some initial results from the survey? I know we just launched, we're recording here on January 28th, and I know the survey just launched on the 27th, just yesterday. But what are we seeing from any initial responses?
Yeah, so we have about 10 responses so far, which is great to see from just launching yesterday. The top priorities for teams are widespread, but some that we've already seen come through. So, like you said, Laura, compliance is a major concern and just making sure that teams ensure compliance and stay up to date there. We've also seen leveraging technology as a big priority for teams. So, using AI and what that looks like, what are the capabilities there? Another one is revising immigration policy. So, like we just talked about. So, what does that look like in an evolving immigration landscape? So, those are just a few, and I'm expecting more responses to roll in, especially as the survey will be open for the next couple of weeks. But this benchmarking survey is gonna have really in-depth data, so I'm excited about it.
Yeah, and like I said, I think teams are really curious and hungry for understanding how other companies are communicating out changes to their sponsored foreign national populations because when things like a travel ban are announced, it's always helpful to know how other companies are communicating and is it effective so that, their colleagues within the industry can mirror or improve on the process to ensure that their employees are staying compliant and aware of the requirements under the changing atmosphere of immigration these days. I think top of mind issue, I know for my clients so far this year and, even sort of leading up to this change in administration has been compliance. We understand that the Trump administration can use infrastructure that's already in place to enforce work site compliance. So employers need to be really diving into their I-9s if they haven't already, auditing those practices, auditing the onboarding. So maybe you've done the 2024 audit and made sure your house is in order, but you also need to make sure of any new hire onboarding practices are also compliant so that you're remaining up to date and compliant with your I-9s as new employees are hired. The other thing, and this is, I think, always a thorny issue for clients, is maintaining public access files. This one gets thorny because if there's ever sort of a change in your team, and there was a teammate that was responsible for public access files, you're not sure where they put them or what organization they're in. I know a lot more of my clients are moving to electronic maintenance of public access files. That way, if there's any sort of transitions within the team, there's continuity in the maintenance of the public access files. So something to consider. I know some clients have been dusting off filing cabinets, auditing them, especially if you have team members who work in different work sites across the US, like the folders might be at headquarters and you've never seen them. So this would be a good time, again, create sort of a project role to knock that out if you haven't already, or work with your partner counsel to help you out. Often you can hire your counsel to support this project if you don't have the in-house resources, but you're definitely going to want to get your arms around the I-9 and public access files this year if you haven't already.
Yeah, that's a great point, Laura. We also asked in our benchmarking survey how prepared teams feel for the Trump administration, and I expect responses to vary widely. I'm sure you agree there. But I would love to pick your brain. What initiatives are your clients focusing on to stay ahead?
I think, I've seen some clients take some different approaches. There's some clients that don't want to come off political and so have maintained a really neutral messaging about how they are approaching 2025. I think I have some other clients who are responding to the high anxiety of their sponsored foreign nationals and are sending out broadcast messages pretty regularly about, what the process is to be supported as a foreign national within their company. But the main either messaging, whether you're trying to stay politically neutral or you're sort of expressing over support. It all comes down to making sure that the data is available for the global mobility teams. And what I mean by this is, updating the, employer's data of, what work sites are listed on any underlying petitions, making sure that we have all the up-to-date, passport information from foreign nationals, sort of all data pieces because, when there are changes announced, the global mobility teams, to be prepared, can pull reports very quickly to see who's impacted and then send out very targeted messaging about, what are the strategies to protect, whether that's the, underlying H-1B status or to protect their ability to maintain that status, extending inside the US, advising on who can or cannot travel, those types of things. So I think, regardless of how teams are messaging support around the change of administration, they are messaging compliance and, updated data, which the challenging part for global mobility is that there's only so much data that they can control. Some data like home addresses, visa pages, if the foreign national is going to travel, is reliant on the foreign national employee to provide that data, which, I'll give you an example. There was an employee who traveled for personal reasons, which happens all the time, but never checked in with anyone and traveled with an expired visa stamp. So I got a call on a weekend saying, I can't travel, I'm stuck abroad. So we take that call only to, quickly pull their page and say, well, they didn't have a valid visa to travel. So, that person just missed the messaging. So sometimes it doesn't matter how effective the messaging is, it does require the employee to read it. So, as a global mobility professional, as the council, you can't control everybody's actions. And so there's still going to be issues. But if you have the data, it's very quickly to understand and identify who's at risk, or in this example, a very obvious like, oopsie, couldn't travel. And so that honestly will continue to happen despite the heightened messaging or support you're giving your foreign national employees.
Right. I couldn't agree more. And things happen that are out of your control. And working in house, and just in life in general, it happens, things happen,
Sure.
but being able to lean on your legal counsel to be organized and structured, okay, here's my database, here's what we know, and then being able to communicate that to your foreign national population. But I can't tell you how many times we had people travel without a visa stamp, and you're just like,
Right.
"Please don't do that ever again." But just communicating that message is so key.
Yeah, and that's gonna get tougher under this
Yeah.
administration, right? Just this week, again, we're recording January 28th. We saw the US Department of State shut down visa operations in Colombia. And so, that could happen in any US consulate abroad. So, the idea of traveling right now is quite dynamic. So the guidance can be,
Mhm.
sure, if you have a valid visa stamp, you can travel now, but that's today. I'm giving you that guidance, and then tomorrow it could be different. So there is
Mhm.
some, I think, personal risk tolerance that some employees are going to travel regardless of the what's at stake, given what the reasons for travel are. So as a global mobility professional, make sure your messaging is there of this is what's required. And so, that there's instructions on what the process is for, due diligence from the company standpoint, because I think what will come into play here, and we'll probably see in the months to come, the challenges of, will you allow your employees to work remotely? We saw this in COVID era when folks were getting stuck outside the US. Is there permission to bring your company laptop abroad? And how long can that employee work abroad if they're caught up in some sort of, travel issue that they find themselves in, which again is just a matter of time before it happens on a broader scale here.
An idea that actually came to mind as you were speaking, Laura, when teams are thinking about policies and what policies to change, I think that's a big one, especially with remote work, in terms of how long they allow their foreign nationals to stay abroad, what that looks like. Are they using vacation time on top
Right.
of, remote work policy time? And as travel policy shifts within the immigration landscape, that will be something to keep in mind too.
Yeah, and then I think, you can really work with counsel that ideally, the messaging is, always have foreign national employees should be checking in with counsel before they travel, especially now more than ever. So whatever messaging you're sending out, also be attaching those remote work policies, making sure that, all the stakeholders within HR or leadership have understood what that policy is, because it's going to be tested. So make sure you're partnering with counsel that when that foreign national employee checks in with counsel, perhaps they're attaching that FAQ about remote work. So counsel is saying like, okay, green light or yellow light or red light for travel, whatever it might be. And then they're attaching like, just FYI, here's the remote work policy. You cannot bring your laptop, or you're allowed to bring your laptop, or whatever it is. And so that's like reinforced so that every step of the way, the messaging is there. Again, whether the foreign national employee reads it or not, it has been presented to them. So if there are any, following issues, that all the information was in their hands before an issue like being stuck abroad remotely working.
100%. So, another question that's come to mind for global mobility professionals is for national anxiety and how to mitigate that. Of course, it's a natural feeling. And I know there's no one size solution fits all. I've seen, mental health resources, town halls, but with your clients, is there anything they're initiating from that perspective?
I haven't seen anything rolled out in sort of a mass form. I think that's difficult, and I think that's gonna change or vary, like you said, based on company culture, and company attitudes towards these things. I know most large corporate companies do offer some sort of like mental health, mental wellness services. I haven't seen it tied directly to any immigration related. I think the best way to support foreign nationals who have the high anxiety is making sure that the partnership you have with Immigration Counsel is available to answer calls or answer emails timely, because I think the anxiety ratchets up when people aren't getting answers that they need to feel comfortable. So this, of course, isn't, asking counsel to be like on demand and working 24/7. We already are working a tremendous amount this last week, and we'll continue under a change in administration. But it's just sort of the timely responses are sort of the best way to support. And that's even for global mobility professionals, which is a lot of pressure because we have been receiving a tremendous amount of questions, questions about like, is it okay if I travel in July? And you're like, that's a really hard thing to predict right now. But even just sort of saying like, if you're going to buy tickets, like buy the refundable, which sometimes people just need that kind of reassurance. And I think that's kind of the best messaging or best anxiety reducer that, the immigration global mobility teams can provide is responsive, timely answers to their questions. I think that's the best I can provide at this point, not being a mental health expert, but having anxiety
Right.
myself, so
I also have anxiety, so I completely get it. Another thing I've seen when speaking with global mobility professionals is some companies are offering affinity groups for expats, which I thought
yeah,
was wonderful. Just being able to have a community where folks can come together and be like, hey, have you tried this consulate for visa stamping? Or what does that look like for you? Or even just to vent, just to get some of
yeah.
that anxiety out. So that's another thing that teams can look at implementing.
I would love to see that a little monitored too with, like, as a way to, make sure that the correct, information is there. Sometimes in chat groups, you get some misinformation like, "Oh, well, my friend." That was the one I heard today. "Oh, my friend didn't have a business card and his visa got denied." No, my friend of a friend, and you're like, "I haven't heard that one." Business card is not a requirement for an L visa. So sometimes the chat groups can get a little, rumor mill-ish, but I do think it's helpful to have the community kind of speak to, "Yeah, we're worried. I'm feeling worried," or, sort of share in the moment. But that would also be a nice way to then, if your employees are meeting within the Slack space or forum, to drop in the information there. I think, meeting the employees where they're at and delivering the information there actually would be great. So almost like creating that forum, if it's adopted within the community, would be a great way then to then funnel the latest bulletins, internal process information, because, folks are sort of chatting there. And then if they have questions, they kind of come up naturally. So I think if, companies are hosting these platforms and forums, I think the sort of best practice within it would be to monitor it and then use that as a information channel for the company to meet those employees in that space.
And to your earlier point, it's a quick response rate, right? So if someone posts on Slack, "Hi, in-house immigration team, what are your thoughts on this?" If it's a more unique case, of course, please email us
Yeah,
separately,
take it
but
offline. Yeah.
take it offline. This is way too complicated, but if it's a quick answer, it's easy to answer, in real time, which is
Yeah, and
helpful.
then, then the employees that are in that community can benefit from the answer. And then you almost kind of generate an FAQ for your employee population, right? Like, what's the process if I have an international business trip? Who do I reach out to, or who do I need to check in with? Like, that becomes sort of the, frequently asked questions. You can, in Slack, I know you can pin things, but anyway, like if you're monitoring it, you kind of see the volume or frequency of the same questions coming up. So that actually would be like a nice data point for teams.
Definitely. Another topic that I'd love to pick your brain on, Laura, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but in terms of policies for global mobility programs, I've seen, and I'm sure other professionals have seen, shifts in policies already in response to the Trump administration. What policies have you seen specifically if folks are interested in learning more?
Yeah, I think the first one we're seeing in response to the change of administration is we're seeing companies respond to, L or E3 visa extensions are now being handled through USCIS. So I think post-COVID, when we saw consulates open up, we saw travel open back up and companies pursue extensions at the consulates abroad. Given that this is now a tougher climate to travel and to obtain visas abroad, given, the recent closure of the US Embassy in Bogota, companies are now filing these petitions, these renewals through USCIS. So that's sort of the first shift that will impact the bottom line. It is more expensive to file these extensions through USCIS. So we're supporting our clients through sort of budget forecasts, changing the forecasts for the service center filings, and then also having to communicate out to foreign nationals how they will be extending their status in the US as opposed to, visiting home country to secure that visa stamp. So that's the first one that I've seen. The second, I've seen more companies pursue premium processing. In the past couple of years, we saw companies ease off premium processing, just timely file the extensions and avoid the additional costs. Now, because anxiety is high, folks want to lock in that approval as soon as possible. So we're seeing sort of programs revert to premium processing, even for extensions. And then, finally, I see an enhanced compliance focus. So we are seeing companies review how they're onboarding foreign nationals, all employees, to make sure I-9s are properly and timely addressed, as well as compliance audits for, like I said earlier in the episode, public access files, work sites, making sure that everything's matching the underlying petition and filing amendments or addressing issues as they come up through those audits.
Right, and I think those are all great, depending on your program. Another thing I've seen in our virtual roundtables is teams starting green card processes earlier, especially
Oh,
with the
sure.
long-term waiting times,
Yeah,
and to get ahead of any sort of, political immigration policy change that might come our way. So, I think just staying ahead and adapting the best you can with the information and leaning on legal counsel will be super crucial. But it'll be ever changing, as we know. So just really trying to stay positive too. I think that's key.
absolutely. I've got my positive sweatshirt on. Just have a donut and a smile. Well, thanks so much for kind of introing what the benchmarking survey is to come. And we'll have you back when we get those results to pick your brain and analyze what comes out of the benchmarking survey. As always, you can find Sydney on LinkedIn. She is the community manager for the Immigration Benchmarking Collective. So if you haven't already, please join. Look it up on LinkedIn. The community is for in-house global mobility professionals only. So Sydney does monitor that, but do join us if you are a qualifying in-house global mobility professional. Sydney, thanks for joining us on the Business Immigration Benchmark.
Thanks so much for having me, Laura.
Catch you next time.